In the sweltering summer of 1968, a man sat at a booth in Wells Restaurant in Harlem, quietly ordering a plate of fried chicken and a cup of coffee. To any outsider, he looked like a dignified elder of the community, well-dressed, calm, and carrying an air of quiet authority. But as he took his last breath and slumped over from a heart attack, the vibrations were felt from the back alleys of New York to the highest offices of the FBI. This wasn't just any man. This was Ellsworth Raymond "Bumpy" Johnson. He was the only man in history to successfully bridge the gap between the ruthless world of organized crime and the soulful heart of the Harlem Renaissance. He was a poet who used a switchblade, a chess master who moved human pieces, and a criminal who was treated like a king. To understand the real Bumpy Johnson is to understand how one man held an entire city in the palm of his hand for 30 years without ever losing his seat at the table. Bumpy's story doesn't begin with a desire for wealth, but with a collision of cultures and a refusal to bow down. Arriving in Harlem from Charleston in the 1920s, he entered a world where the policy game, the illegal numbers lottery, was the economic lifeblood of the black community. It was a billion-dollar industry run by local bankers, but it eventually caught the eye of the notorious white mobsters of the era, specifically the brutal Dutch Schultz. Schultz attempted a violent takeover of Harlem's rackets, expecting the local bookies to fold. Most did, but Bumpy Johnson, then an enforcer for the Queen of Harlem, Stephanie St. Clair, decided to fight back. This wasn't just a gang war, it was a matter of community sovereignty. Bumpy didn't fight with just muscle, he fought with psychological warfare. He and his crew would orchestrate kidnappings and bombings targeting Schultz's operations. The brilliance of Bumpy's strategy was his understanding of leverage. He knew that the Italian mafia, led by Lucky Luciano, was tired of Schultz's erratic and heat-seeking behavior. Bumpy eventually brokered a deal that was unheard of for a black man in that era. He surrendered the independence of Harlem's numbers to the Italians, but in exchange, he became the permanent middleman. He was the only person through whom the mob could do business in Harlem. He became the fixer, the gatekeeper, and the undisputed boss of the streets. What makes Bumpy Johnson an enduring figure in history isn't just his criminal efficiency, but his complex relationship with the people of Harlem. He lived by a strict code of ethics that felt almost medieval. While he was known to have killed men with his own hands and was legendary for his skill with a knife, earning him a reputation that made even the most hardened hitmen hesitate, he was simultaneously the neighborhood's greatest benefactor. Every Thanksgiving and Christmas, Bumpy would distribute thousands of turkeys and gifts to the poor. He paid the rent for struggling widows and funded the educations of promising young students. This wasn't just a PR stunt, it was a deep-seated belief in protecting his own. Because the legitimate authorities, the NYPD and the government, often ignored or oppressed the citizens of Harlem, Bumpy stepped in as a shadow government. He was a man of high intellect who spent his free time reading Shakespeare and writing philosophy. He was a master chess player who would sit in local parks for hours, challenging anyone to a game. This contrast, the intellectual poet who could turn into a terrifying force of violence in a heartbeat, is what kept the streets in check. People didn't just fear him, they respected him. He was the godfather before the American public even knew what that term meant. Bumpy's life was punctuated by long stretches in prison, but his most famous stint was at Alcatraz. Even on the Rock, surrounded by the most dangerous criminals in America, Bumpy's aura remained intact. He was one of the few inmates who wasn't bullied or bothered. Even the guards treated him with a level of cautious deference because of his connections on the outside. There is a long-standing, unverified legend regarding Bumpy's involvement in the famous 1962 escape from Alcatraz. Some street historians and former inmates suggest that the escapees, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, could never have secured a boat to meet them in the freezing waters of the San Francisco Bay without Bumpy's help. The theory suggests that Bumpy used his outside syndicate to ensure a pickup was waiting for them. While the FBI has never confirmed this, it speaks to the level of influence Bumpy was believed to possess. Even from the most secure prison in the world, he was thought to be capable of orchestrating the impossible. When he was finally released in 1963 and returned to Harlem, he was met with a parade. The neighborhood hadn't forgotten him. However, the world had changed. The civil rights movement was in full swing, and a new, deadlier commodity was flooding the streets: heroin. In his later years, Bumpy faced a moral and tactical dilemma. The lucrative nature of the drug trade was impossible to ignore, but he saw the devastation it caused in his community. Bumpy allowed the drug trade to exist because he controlled the territory, but he tried to maintain a level of order that kept the chaos at bay. During this era, he took a young man under his wing named Frank Lucas. Lucas would later become famous, depicted in the film American Gangster, for cutting out the middlemen and importing heroin directly from Southeast Asia. However, the real Bumpy Johnson was reportedly more cautious and traditional than the flashy Lucas. Bumpy believed in the old-world style of organized crime: discretion, loyalty, and community roots. He often warned Lucas that the new way of doing business, which involved high-profile flashiness and a total disregard for the social fabric of Harlem, would eventually lead to their downfall. Bumpy's final years were a constant cat-and-mouse game with federal agents. He was under 24-hour surveillance for the last 5 years of his life. Despite the pressure, he never cracked, never became an informant, and never lost his cool. He remained the Czar of Harlem until the very second his heart gave out. The death of Bumpy Johnson marked the end of an era. Without his stabilizing influence, Harlem's underworld descended into a more fractured, violent, and chaotic state. The code he lived by, where the community was protected from outside predators and internal disputes were settled with logic rather than random gunfire, began to vanish. Bumpy Johnson remains a polarizing figure because he represents a paradox of the American dream. He was a man of immense talent, intellect, and leadership, who was barred from legitimate success by the racial barriers of the early 20th century. Instead of accepting a secondary role in society, he chose to build his own empire in the shadows. He was a criminal, yes, but he was also a protector, a diplomat, and a strategist. He wasn't just a gangster, he was a symptom of his time and a master of his environment. He proved that even in a world designed to keep a man down, a sharp mind and a steady hand could build a kingdom that lasted a lifetime. To this day, his name is spoken in Harlem with a mixture of awe and caution, a reminder of a time when the streets had a king who walked among the people, playing chess and writing poetry, all while holding the keys to the city.